Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Shelton and
Mr. Rancourt.
We're here to walk you through Activity 3, Reproduction. At this time, if you would please log into LabAids and open up your lab manual to Activity 3, which can be found on page 24, we're going to go ahead and begin. Please follow along as Mr. Rancourt and I read aloud. Joe has a younger brother and sister. He starts to think about how they each look different. Except for being tall and having loose joints like his mother, Joe looks more like their father, with straight light brown hair and dark brown eyes. Joe's little brother looks more like their mother, with curly dark brown hair and gray eyes. Joe's sister is more of a blend, with their father's dark brown eyes and hair that's light brown like their father's and curly like their mother's. Joe starts to wonder about how they all seem to have received different combinations of traits from their parents.
Every human is the offspring of two biological parents. Most organisms that you are familiar with, like the kittens in the photo, are also the offspring of two parents. They have certain features of both parents, but are not exactly like either parent. Some organisms, however, are the offspring of only one parent. They reproduce by making an exact copy of themselves. In this activity, you will read about how different organisms reproduce, and this will help you evaluate your models from the last activity.
So let's take a look at the guiding question. Essentially, at the end of this activity, you should be able to tell us what cells have to do with sexual and asexual reproduction. To do so, the only material we are going to need is a 3-level reading guide. This 3-level reading guide can be found in your menu, and it looks just like this. You won't need this till the end of the activity, so go ahead and open it up, make yourself a copy, and save it till the very end. In addition to that, we're also going to ask you to take a look at your menu and open up the analysis questions for Activity 3. As we complete this activity, you will be taking some notes about the stopping to think questions along the way.
Okay, so let's start with the reading. So I'm on the bottom of page, it should be 26 in...
25.
Or 25. Oh yeah, 25 on there. Yeah, sorry, it's 25 in yours. Okay, it's called asexual reproduction. There are two basic kinds of reproduction, asexual and sexual. Some organisms can reproduce both ways, while other organisms can only use one of the two kinds of reproduction. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. If you completed the cell biology unit of Issues in Life Sciences, which you did last year as 7th graders, you learned about bacteria and other microorganisms. These organisms reproduce asexually. In asexual reproduction, a single-celled organism, such as a bacterium or an amoeba, reproduces by dividing in two. Take a look at the image on the right side of the page about asexual reproduction of a bacterial cell. Each new organism produced is called an offspring, which is identical to the parent cell. At this time, pause the video and respond to Stopping to Think question number 1, found at the top of the next page. That question asks, in asexual reproduction of a bacterial cell, is it clear which of the two cells produced is the parent and which is the offspring? Explain your answer. Please note this is a 2-part question. As such, you need to respond to both parts.
Okay, so after you've answered Stopping to Think question 1, you need to keep reading. So right now, I am on page 26, right underneath where it says Stopping to Think, these two identical offspring. These two identical offspring of asexual reproduction are both exact copies of the single parent organism. These exact copies are called clones. A clone inherits all of its traits from its one parent.
Each clump of bacterial cells in the photograph below is a clone. Each clump was formed by many divisions over time, starting from one bacterial cell. In other words, each bacterium in the clump is descended from that one original cell. Each of the cells in these clones has identical genes and traits as its parent cell, except in rare cases when a random change occurs. You will learn more about these random changes in a later activity.
Even some multicellular organisms can reproduce asexually. Budding is the name given to a process in which a small new organism grows directly out from the parent's body. One animal that reproduces this way is the hydra. See the figure below, the blue picture. Each cell in the bud has the same number and kind of genes and traits as the parent cell that produced it.
Let's take a minute and look at these photographs. So in this first photo here, what you're going to see is a clump of bacteria on the petri dish that contains many bacteria cells. Every cell in one of these clumps is identical to one original parent cell. If we look down at this picture at the bottom here, I'm not sure why we're not seeing it, but if you look at that picture, it says one way the hydra reproduces itself is by asexual budding. The buds will soon break off from the parent to become identical offspring organisms.
There you go. So you can see the original hydra right here, and that you see that it's starting to regrow another exact clone. Notice that this one looks exactly the same as that one right there. That's what the picture is trying to tell you right there. Cool.
All right, so go ahead and turn to the next page. And Mr. Rancourt will continue reading.
The strawberry plant, see photo below, can also reproduce asexually by budding. Tiny new plants are produced on a root-like runner. Each of these little plants can eventually separate from the parent and become a new individual identical to its parent. Any organism that is produced through asexual reproduction can be considered a clone. That's important to remember, since it inherits all of its genes and traits from one parent.
So let's take a look at this photo before moving on to the stopping to think. So this is a strawberry plant, and a strawberry plant can produce a new copy of itself by runners. So these things right here are the actual runners, okay? This is the parent plant. So these runners come off of this parent plant, okay? And here is an example of a new plant. At this point in time, we're going to ask that you pause the video and respond to the stopping to think question number 2, which states, your friends tell you only single-celled organisms reproduce asexually. After all, how could a multicellular organism do that? How do you respond to your friend? In other words, does your friend actually have the correct information? Please pause the video now, go to your analysis document, and answer stopping to think number 2.
Okay, so now let's start with sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction. While some animals can reproduce asexually and sexually, humans and many other animals can only reproduce sexually. An offspring produced by sexual reproduction inherits traits from 2 parents, not 1. You are not a perfect copy of either of your parents. Otherwise, you would look literally exactly like your parents. You also are not a perfect blend of your parents' traits. So what determines which traits you get from each parent?
Sexual reproduction occurs when a tiny sperm cell produced by a male unites with an egg cell produced by a female, as shown on the next page. Each of these cells, called sex cells, has only one set of genes. This means the sex cells have half the number of genes present in the rest of the organism's body cells. The union of the sperm and the egg is called fertilization.
Cool. So the cell that results from fertilization will have 2 copies of every gene, with 1 set of genes from the egg and 1 set of genes from the sperm. Because genes help to determine traits, sexual reproduction produces a new cell that develops into an individual with traits inherited from both parents. As the organism grows, the fertilized egg produces more cells that have 2 sets of genes and are genetically identical to the fertilized egg. This new individual will be different from each of its biological parents. Also, Because no two sperm or egg cells contain exactly the same genetic information, no two offspring produced by the same parents are identical. A unique set of inherited genes causes a unique set of inherited traits in each sexually produced offspring of the same two parents.
So taking a look at this photo, you'll notice that the image here, this big ball is actually a large egg cell, and this is the tiny sperm cell that is about to fertilize the large egg. It then says there is an exception to this last statement: identical twins. Identical twins result when one fertilized egg splits before beginning to grow and develop. The two eggs then become two genetically identical offspring or children. Only one fertilization occurs, but two organisms are produced.
Okay, so asexual and sexual reproduction are summed up in the table below. So let's look at it. So you see on the left side here, we have asexual reproduction. Remember, in asexual reproduction, there's only one parent. And therefore, the offspring, or what we call clones, are identical to the parent. So if my parents were asexually reproducing and they produced me, I would literally just look like my dad. Or if it was my mom that was asexually reproducing, I would literally look just like her. In sexual reproduction, that's where you have two parents. So the offspring inherit traits from both parents. So that makes sense because that's why I look like a good combination of my mom and my dad, because I got some of his information and some of her information, and it mixed it and got me.
So let's go ahead and let's answer stopping to think number 3. In stopping to think number 3, it states fraternal twins result when two eggs are released at the same time, are both fertilized by different sperm cells, and both develop into offspring. This is very common in dogs and cats. Why are identical twins much more similar than fraternal twins? Explain. Speaking of that, Mr. Rancourt, do you know anything about fraternal twins?
Yeah, I'm a fraternal twin.
You have a twin brother named?
David.
And they actually are fraternal twins. So what we need you to do right now is to stop and pause this video, pull back up your analysis questions, and respond to stopping to think number 3.
Okay, so now you've just completed stopping to think 3, and now I'm reading about cloning. Okay, so cloning. In nature, a clone is an offspring produced by asexual reproduction. Yet you've probably heard the term cloning used to describe a process that produces a sheep or other animal identical to its one parent. So it's possible. It is. It just takes a little special science, so to speak. How can this be possible given that sheep, like humans, always have two parents? Remember, mammals never reproduce asexually.
Scientists have now produced certain organisms artificially through a type of asexual reproduction. Consider the cloning of a sheep, illustrated in the figure on the next page. The part of the cell that contains the genes, which is the nucleus, is removed from one of the cells of the sheep's body. This nucleus is then placed into an egg cell whose nucleus has already been removed. If this artificially fertilized egg develops in a womb, it grows into a sheep that is genetically identical to the sheep that its nucleus came from. It is, therefore, a clone of that sheep.
So if you look on the next page here, I'm going to flip real quick. Here is the diagram of what Mrs. Shelton just read. So let's go through it real quick. So here's the adult sheep that's going to be cloned. And here's the body sheep from that adult. And what happens is that the egg cell from another sheep is taken and they remove the nucleus or the inside of the cell that has all the information. So they take the information from that cell and remove it. And what they do is they inject the egg cell into this nucleus from the adult sheep, put it into the womb, grow a baby sheep, and it literally looks exactly like its mother. So this one will look identical and have the exact same DNA as its mom.
So let's take a look at stopping to think question number 4. When I'm finished with this, make sure you pause the video and go to your analysis document in order to record your response. Stopping to think number 4 asks, how is a cloned animal, such as a sheep, different from an identical twin? Please pause the video now to answer this question.
Okay, so real quick, I'm going to show you what exactly you do with the student sheet 3.1, specifically when you do 3-level reading guides, because sometimes the directions, if you don't read them well, are confusing. So let's go through it real quick. So for number 1, it says place an X next to the statements below that you believe agree with what the reading says. So what that means is if it's true, you're going to place an X to it. If it isn't, you don't do anything with it. Leave it blank. Sometimes the exact words found in the reading are used. At other times, other words may be used to communicate the same meaning. So you're not looking to see back into the text if you find this exact line. You just want to make sure that the information that's stated there is actually true and was said by the story. Okay? So for instance, for 1A, asexual reproduction requires only one parent. If that was mentioned in the reading, then you should put an X right there. If that statement is false, don't do anything with it. Look at number 2 real quick. Place an X next to the statements below that you believe represent the intended meaning. So again, if it's true, then you're going to put the X next to it. If it's not, don't do it at all. Yeah? Now, here's the difference between 1 and 2 and 3. Read the directions with me. Place an X next to the statement below that you agree with. So now if you agree with the statements, we want you to put an X. If you don't, leave it blank. So you're only marking the statements that are true with an X in number 1 and 2. And then on number 3, you're just going to put an X next to the statement if you think the same way.
Once you're finished with the 3-level reading guide, navigate back to your analysis questions and complete each and every analysis question for submission into Google Classroom. Don't forget, this 3-level reading guide will also be submitted into Google Classroom from your menu this week. Have a great week, guys.